It is very good to see all of you here, so thank you for coming out and joining us this morning. And thank you, Chris. I appreciate your table talk and just that reminder that we're not gathering here alone, us by ourselves, but we really are part of a kingdom that is worshiping God, a kingdom that is doing His will all across the world. And so it's always encouraging to me just to remember that point that we are gathering here today and people all over, and they are singing this song in their hearts. Be like thee. That's what we are being made. We're being made into the image of Christ, conformed into His image, and it's so encouraging. So a great reminder of what we are doing here today. Now, to help you prepare for next week, if you can read, pray through, and meditate on Mark 12, 18 through 34, we'll be covering the next two conflict scenes in this series that we are beginning here today. Okay, so we are picking up with a conflict between Jesus and the Pharisees and the Herodians. So Mark's Jerusalem narrative has been fast-paced. Ever since he has entered into Jerusalem, everything has moved quickly. Jesus enters Jerusalem in the style of the Prince of Peace, but is greeted as a revolutionary general. His cheering crowds expect him to overturn Rome's rule, but instead he actually enters the temple and overturns their greed and religious hypocrisy. He curses the fruitless fig tree to explain his temple cleansing, and then he teaches the parable of the vineyard owner to predict the coming judgment about to befall Jerusalem for her faithlessness. This is not the Messiah that they expected. This is not what they were thinking that their Savior would come to do. So today's scene is the first in a series of conflict narratives that unfold from the last scene. So we're going to see it here in Mark 12. They were looking for a way to arrest him, but feared the crowd. And that is the key there. They fear the crowd, and Jesus' popularity stands in the way of their arresting him. So their religious leaders know that they are losing power, and so they respond to Jesus' indictment against them. You remember that his entrance into the temple essentially indicts them for their unfaithfulness, and they go on the offensive now against him. Instead of responding with humility to repent and to acknowledge that they have failed in their calling, they are going to try to trap Jesus. So a series of 4 controversy scenes unfold now, and each one is centered around 4 questions, 1 question each. The first is initiated by the Pharisees and the Herodians, and that's what we're going to take time to look at today. The second by the Sadducees, and the third by one of the scribes. And then finally, Jesus responds by posing his own question that's going to put an end to their challenges. So today's controversy raises a complex question that centers around whether or not Jews should pay taxes to Rome. But the question itself is far more than being about mere taxes, even though the question of taxation was a very sensitive question. So we want to set the stage for this. We want to understand what's going on. First of all, we know that these controversy scenes, they are framed in the traditional rabbinic debate style. What I mean by that is this is a time during the Passover when millions of Jewish pilgrims would descend upon the city. So the energy was electric. There were millions of people in this city at this time for the Pentecost. And one of the things that they loved to do is they would go to the temple and they would watch the famous rabbis debate with one another. They would argue about theology, and the crowds would gather around them and watch these debates. And so that's actually the style of what's happening here. Jesus, surrounded by the crowds, the Pharisees and the religious authorities in Jerusalem are taking advantage of this to try and discredit him publicly, to weaken his standing before the crowds. Now, taxes were a very sore point to the devout Jews. And it wasn't only the cost that bothered them, although for many, the financial burden that was placed on them was serious, because they not only paid local and temple taxes, but they also, if they lived in Galilee, had to pay Herod's taxes as well. So there was a significant burden on the people. But their frustration was about more than all of this. The Jews celebrated the fact that they were God's free people. And we see this in John's gospel when Jesus tells them that they are slaves. And the Jews respond, "No, we are not. We are God's children." And he says, anyone who sins is a slave to sin. But the people, though they celebrate the freedom, when God took them out of Egypt, you remember, by his strong outstretched arm, he leads them free from Egypt, the house of bondage. The people agonized over the fact that they were not indeed free. And this would be no more sore than during the time of the Passover. Again, remembering that God led them out of Egypt. They have been ruled by others ever since the Babylonian invasion half a millennium ago. And they had a very brief period under the Hasmoneans where maybe they were a little autonomous, but their present humiliation under Rome's rule is further emphasizing the frustration and the anger that they have, that Rome subjugates them. So all of this is present, not only the financial burden, but the national humiliation that they are forced to pay taxes to Caesar. All of this is involved in the question. So the coin that Jesus calls for was itself a symbol of far more than just taxation. So let's go ahead and look a little closer. Then they sent some of the Pharisees and the Herodians to Jesus to trap him in his words. When they came, they said to him, "Teacher, we know you are truthful and don't care what anyone thinks, nor do you show partiality, but teach the way of God truthfully. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we?" Jesus has threatened to the status quo of their power dynamics. So the Herodians, who were in Jerusalem because Herod had come down for the Passover, have joined up with the Pharisees to pose a trap for Jesus. Now, the Pharisees and the Herodians themselves had very stark differences. They were not natural allies. The Herodians were pro-Roman rule, and they sought to use Rome to secure their interests. So they were trying to align Judaism with the Romans, while the Pharisees were very opposed to Roman rule, and they simply reluctantly accepted and tolerated rule because they had no other choice. But they really wanted to carve out a space for themselves. They just wanted Rome to leave them alone so they could do their own thing. But in Jesus, these two otherwise opposed groups have found a common enemy, and so we see them here working together against Jesus. They come to publicly discredit him, and they are trying to find an opportunity to charge him, either in Roman courts or in the Jewish courts of the Sanhedrin. And they don't really care which court, which opportunity they can take. This is the perfect opportunity to discredit Jesus and to leave him vulnerable to be tried in court. So they lay down, they approach him by laying down heavy flattery, and it's designed to force Jesus into a corner and try to force his answer into the trap that they're laying. By saying that Jesus is truthful and doesn't care about, saving face, and that he teaches accurately God's way, they're trying to prime him to teach the most extreme stance and to openly oppose Rome so they can bring charges of sedition against him. Alternatively, they hope if he won't side with the zealots, that would be the zealot position. If he won't side there, they're hoping he might support the Roman taxation, and this would discredit him in front of the crowds and make him vulnerable to other charges. They could bring blasphemy charges against him in Jewish courts, for example. So they pose their question: is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? Now, I'm sure the energy in this crowd was electric. Again, over 1 million estimated Jewish pilgrims descend upon the city for Passover. Rome was on high alert for revolutionary activity. The Jews believe Jesus is their revolutionary Messiah, and the high priests and scribes and elders are vulnerable, so they are trying to set this off. So asking this question right in the middle of the Passover is trying to rub salt in an open wound. They might as well have asked the question, does Rome have lawful authority to rule God's people? So how Jesus answers this question could set off either the Jewish onlookers or the Roman soldiers. Let's see how he responds. But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, "Why are you testing me? Bring me a denarius to look at." So they brought a coin. "Whose image and inscription is this?" he asked them. "Caesar's," they replied. Now Jesus knows what they're up to, and he exposes their hypocrisy. So he calls for a denarius, which is the equivalent to about a day's wage for a common laborer, and it could buy you about 15 pounds of wheat. You could feed your family for about a week off of this wage. But neither Jesus nor his disciples have this coin. So either they don't have this much money, or possibly, and I think more likely, they don't have it for the reason he's about to the point he's about to make. So to answer their question, Jesus calls for someone to bring a silver denarius. But here we want to understand the answer provided by the coin goes much further than simply answering the question about taxation. Jews were forbidden from having idolatrous images. And in their day, the scholars would debate a little bit about whether or not this second command included images of like flowers and things like that. But it was universally agreed upon that images, human images, were completely forbidden. And so they were not supposed to even possess idolatrous images. So now here, in the very shadow of the temple, there is a coin with the image and the inscription of Caesar glaring out coldly at them. And it bears this blasphemous title engraven on it, which reads in English, "Augustus Tiberius, son of the divine Augustus." And on the reverse side of this, it called him the high priest. So they held in their hand a coin proclaiming Tiberius to be both son of a god and high priest. So the Romans would have been hard-pressed to mint a more offensive coin to the Jews if they had even tried. And we can be certain that the irony of this whole scene would not have been lost on Mark's readers, who now know Jesus to be the true Son of God, standing in the temple next to the Jewish chief priests. So in one illustration, Jesus demonstrates their hypocrisy and flagrant violation of the second commandment, which again forbids the very thing they are holding in their hands. And we actually know, as we look back through the historical record, some devout Jews were so shocked by this kind of coin that they would try to avoid the coin altogether, even refusing to touch the coins. There were alternative Jewish coins, as well as the drachma, which was a Greek coin that was equivalent to the denarius. So by asking them to produce a coin, Jesus is actually exposing their own hypocrisy, showing that they even possess these coins. They are not as righteous and superior as they are presenting themselves to be. And so we come to Jesus' answer here. Jesus told them, "Give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And they were utterly amazed at him. So in typical form, Jesus refuses to collude with either party. He's not joining the pro-Roman party, nor is he joining the anti-party. Instead, his answer overturns their hypocrisy. He's continuing to go straight to the heart of the matter, and he challenges them by how they're looking at the whole situation. They are worried about who's getting their money, and he's actually asking them a much higher question. His answer presents a challenge when interpreting meaning. And this is a challenge that many scholars today wrestle with his answer. What does he mean? Does Jesus mean that there are things that belong to Caesar and things that belong to God, and that these are separate? Or does his answer mean to emphasize their responsibility to God, to show God as over all things? Now, I like how N.T. Wright has framed this. So I'm going to read from him. Again, sometimes before I get into this, sometimes it's helpful to, when you're trying to ascertain what does something mean, to understand perhaps what it does not mean. He says, what he didn't mean, despite many attempts to squash his words into this shape, was that you could divide human life and the world into two segments, the religious part and the political or the social part. That's a much later idea, which gained ground only in the 18th century. And this is something that throughout this series, we have emphasized this point. There isn't this divide that we like to imagine, where there are some things that are purely secular and some things that are religious. God is God over all things, and Jesus has come to advance the kingdom of God, the reign of God in all things. And so Wright goes on. This passage isn't designed as a full-scale statement of Christian truth on religion and society or church and state, but it was a quick, sharp-edged quip for a particular occasion. But what Jesus said will bear a lot of thinking through and working out. The kingdom of God goes beyond the sterile either-or questions which crafty people, often with flattery here, like to pose. God grants us wisdom to see the heart of things and to give ourselves wholly to our true God and King. And this is the point of the matter. He's asking a key question, and I was a little bit kicking myself this morning because this question is the perfect question to start this off with. What belongs to God? What are the things that belong to God? And taken in this light, Jesus' words need to be read in the light of this unfolding controversy which is happening between himself and the religious authorities. He has entered the temple. Jesus publicly indicts their derelict leaders. He's denounced their fruitlessness. As he approached Jerusalem, You remember that Jesus, he sees Jerusalem. This is his love. He sees Jerusalem and he cries out, I've longed to gather you to myself. I have longed to bring you in, but you refused. You would not recognize the day of your visitation. He loves Jerusalem, but they have not rendered to God the things that belong to God. You'll remember when he enters the temple, what does he find? In the Gentile courts where he's supposed to find the worship of God, people coming in and proclaiming the praises of their God and King, what does he find? Merchants pushing out the worship, the very thing that belongs to God. He is asking the people a very important question. It goes way beyond what they're concerned about. You remember, their concern is merely about the money. Who gets my money? And he says, you are badly mistaken. Who gets your life? Now, I love this comparison. Many have noted that he asks them for the coin, and upon the coin he says whose image and inscription is on the coin. And of course it's Caesar's. But one could ask this question: whose image and inscription is written on every human life? You are the image of God, and upon your heart is supposed to be inscribed the will and heart of God, the mind of God. And so he's asking this question, and it goes far beyond the taxation. What are the things that belong to God? And I think this informs the very identity of us as a church. We gather together to bring the things of God, our lives together, to bring him glory, to bring together a family that worships him in spirit and truth. So this is a simple question that I want to leave you with this week. What are the things of God? What are the things that I should render to God in my life? A simple question that I think is worth leaving with here. So as we now turn our attention to worship God, I want to invite our elders to please stand. Again, I want to thank all of our visitors who are with us here. If there is anything that you need us to walk with you through, if you have anything on your heart, a burden that you need to ask us to help you carry, if you want to respond to the gospel by starting your journey as a Christian believer, by being baptized, please come either now or after the service, see one of the elders or myself, and we'll be happy to walk with you in that. Please come worship our God and King.